Before its highly controversial launch due to poor optimization, it was discovered that Star Wars Jedi Survivor was going to have a gargantuan file size, coming in at approximately a whopping 150 gigabytes. That's a big game, and if you've seen my video on the subject, then you know I don't think too highly of games that don't really justify their gluttonous proportions. Admittedly though, it's not the most egregious offender I've seen. There have been worse. But thankfully it's a single player game, so it's not going to hold your storage hostage on the long term. You can easily delete it the moment you're done with it. But then I also found out that, due to its huge size, a significant chunk of the game will not fit on the PS5 and Xbox Series 100GB Blu-ray discs, and thus needs to be downloaded in order for the player to have all content on their console. This is the detail that actually irked me, and for two reasons. The first one being, by depending on an extra download that is hosted on a server somewhere you do not have control over to give you the rest of the content you bought, you do not truly own your copy of the game. Your access to the game you bought on a disc still hinges on an extra download that could disappear in the future. That is pretty damn annoying, and completely defeats a major benefit of buying physical in the first place, which is truly owning the games you spend money on, as opposed to a license to play them. So you might as well just buy the whole damn game digitally in the first place. The second reason this situation irked me is, why the hell aren't there just 2 discs? Wouldn't that be the most obvious and consumer-friendly solution? I know EA and consumer friendliness don't mix, but this wouldn't have been the first modern game to do it. In fact, the PS4 versions of Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok had 2 discs, as did Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate and Mass Effect Legendary Edition. CDPR might have fumbled the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 pretty badly, but the one thing they got right was releasing the game on 2 discs so a download was not needed to at least play the pre-patch version of the game. Not that you should do that. Square Enix also did this for Final Fantasy VII Remake earlier that same year, and even a couple years before it, Rockstar had 2 discs for Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm aware that an extra disc for every copy can add to the production cost, but I have a hard time believing it would be an increase so large that it would be prohibitively expensive to fucking EA of all companies, and for a highly anticipated Star Wars game at that. Plus, it's typically shipping and freight that costs the most when it comes to production. There's no way that this level of penny pinching is necessary to keep one of the biggest game publishers in the world afloat. I know physical games requiring a partial download is not a new issue. This isn't the first time I've talked about it, and it's been happening for several years at least. It's especially bothersome on the Switch. I feel like I hear about a major Switch physical release still requiring a download every few months, and it pisses off the Switch owners every time. Rightfully so, because as I mentioned, it defeats the purpose of buying physical in the first place. But this Jedi Survival file size issue ultimately led me to think about physical media as a whole. If you're already familiar with my content, then you know I'm a staunch supporter of physical media, or at least having copies of your favorite pieces of media that you have total control over. Obviously, it's not always a guarantee that everything you own will still work in 20 years. Bit rot is a thing. But always having your own copy, ideally multiple, but that's a lot of work, that isn't reliant on third-party services to function is, at the end of the day, the best method of maintaining access to what you love. But there's always a very, very weird pushback to this that eventually pops up when the discussion begins. Some people have a strangely powerful hatred for physical media and don't buy any themselves, and think that holding onto it is inherently anti-technology or something, like the refusal to buy digital is holding back some kind of massive advancement. I get it. Digital gaming is convenient. Clicking the buy button and simply downloading it to your machine without needing to leave the house is nice. But when I say that digital purchases limit your ownership over what you're buying, I'm not just talking about an actual disc you hold in your hands. I'm talking about all the implications that come with that. A common rebuttal against physical media supporters that was used fairly commonly about 8 to 10 years ago, I haven't seen it much now, was the house fire scenario. I've seen this in action a few times. Someone says true ownership is a benefit to physical media because access to your physical collection cannot be taken from you on a whim by the people who control a service you're using, because if you lose access to your digital services, then all your digital purchases are gone too. And then someone retorts saying, well, a house fire can destroy your whole physical collection. How is that any different? At first, it might sound like a reasonable comparison, at least it did to some people 10 years ago, but it fails to address one important thing. A collection of physical media is a library of individual pieces that you can separately manipulate and transfer ownership of without affecting any other pieces. Every piece has its own set value, whereas a digital collection that is tied to an account, like Steam or PlayStation Network, is a blob that simply gets bigger with every purchase. That might sound odd, so let me explain a bit more. Even if a house fire were to start in my home, and assuming I'm there to save some of my belongings, I at least have the opportunity to grab an armful of my favorite games, movies, books, or whatever to take with me. But if my Steam account is banned and I can't appeal for some reason, then I don't have that opportunity with any of the games I bought, except maybe the games I already had downloaded prior to the ban. This doesn't sound like a huge distinction at first, but the implications get bigger the more you think about it. You see, when you buy a game on Steam or PlayStation Network or Xbox Marketplace, you're not buying an individual piece of media that you can manipulate by itself, besides installing. Instead, you're simply adding value to your account as a whole. You cannot resell digital purchases. The best you can do is sell the whole account, meaning every game you buy on these digital storefronts is like a cup of water being poured into a swimming pool that represents your entire account. Once the water is mixed in, it'll never be separated again. Let's say you've had a Steam or PSN or Xbox Live account for 15 years. You own 500 games, a healthy mix of indies and AAA titles, with the average price you paid being $20 per game, meaning your account is essentially worth $10,000. Then you lose access to that account somehow and can't get it back. Maybe you got banned for some reason and you can't appeal, or because you were hacked and wrongfully punished. I have seen reports of that happening to others. Either way, your account and all the associated games are now completely inaccessible. 15 years and $10,000 worth of games gone in an instant, and at the whim of a company no less, and with no opportunity to even save your favorites, because those games are not individual pieces of media. They're all tied to your account, which is the one thing that holds all the value. The games did not have any value on their own. I know that getting banned at all is highly unlikely, and it's not going to happen to you unless you're a rampant cheater or something, but depending on how many games you own for one account, the loss of that account is monetarily equivalent to having your car completely destroyed without any insurance. And that's an amount that I would rather not put into the hands of a company who can take it all away in the blink of an eye. I apologize if I sound like I'm demonizing digital. That is not my intention. I still do buy games digitally when physical isn't an option. I also stream movies and music more often than not, and typically only purchase my favorites. So I want to take this chance to now move this discussion over to the future of physical media. There's no denying that many people use, enjoy, and find convenience in digital storefronts and streaming services, and for many reasons. The biggest are simply the ease of use and immense variety that's available as soon as you create your account, and the fact that you can consume it all basically immediately. When it comes to games, however, you have two very different types of digital consumption. You can either download the game and then play it natively from your machine, or stream the game like you would a movie or TV show, but you send your button inputs over the internet and to a client, where your actions are played back through the video footage of your gameplay that you are receiving. The vast majority of people prefer the former, obviously, because the latter could be horrendous depending on your internet connection's latency. One big part of this whole discussion that's been going on for a long time is the increasing prevalence of digital media, especially in games. Every once in a while we see the articles floating around about how many transactions are being made on Steam, PSN, etc., and how they blow away physical game purchases. Unfortunately, these articles and statistics usually include items that are only available digitally, like indies, DLC, microtransactions, and mobile games. So the figures ultimately end up being skewed towards digital, since there are magnitudes more items available digitally than physically. But even with that in mind, it's no question that digital gaming is big, and it's been growing for well over a decade. Before the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were revealed to the world, it was a somewhat common prediction that those consoles would be digital only. Hindsight is 2020 though, and it was clearly too early for that to happen. But then the prediction popped up again before the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series were announced, and it seemed a bit more plausible. But again, I wasn't really buying it. And again, it didn't happen. Very recently, I've already been seeing people assume that the PlayStation 6 and Xbox whatever are going to be digital only too. And once more, it's more plausible than last time, but I still don't think it's a foregone conclusion. Millions of physical game copies are still sold on a week-by-week basis around the world. Even in Japan, the regular PS5 is outselling the digital-only model at a ratio of up to 4-1. There's a lot of unnecessary doom and gloom pertaining to the future of physical media for games. And even as somebody who loves physical, I don't think there's any cause for alarm. Simply put, physical media will always have its supporters, and they will always make up a portion of the consumer base that is too big to completely ignore. If you want evidence supporting that, all you need to do is turn your head slightly and look over at the music, movie, and television industries. I just mentioned a bit ago how insanely easy it is to start streaming stuff, and it's especially true for those mediums. It takes no effort whatsoever to make an account on a couple different services and suddenly have a seemingly limitless amount of things to watch or listen to. Consuming music, movies, and shows digitally is painfully simple, to the point where a more casual viewer or listener can live without making an individual purchase ever again. However, that ease of use and those huge libraries still have not wiped away CDs, vinyl records, Blu-rays, or even DVDs. According to the Recording Industry Association of America, or RIAA, there was a huge resurgence in CD and vinyl sales in 2021 and 2022, with 74 million copies sold, and 41 million were vinyl records, meaning vinyl, which is the more expensive format of the two, actually outsold CDs. And then, according to the Digital Entertainment Group, there was $1.5 billion in DVD and Blu-ray sales in 2022, and an additional $500 million in DVD and Blu-ray rentals. Yes, physical movie rentals still pull in $500 million per year. Will all of these numbers continue to slowly go down over time? Yeah, of course. But will they ever hit zero? Probably not. The fact that vinyl records are not only still existing, but also extremely healthy, should show that physical media will exist as long as there are people who want it. And there always will be. At worst, it'll just become an enthusiast market held up by a constant stream of limited releases, which already happens anyway because every form of media has its own collection of publishers and distributors whose entire gimmick is making limited prints of some obscure or old classics. But there's one outlier to this, and it's PC gaming. Games don't get physical releases on PC anymore, and it's simultaneously understandable, but also a bit weird. The PC platform has had access to online gaming for longer than consoles, so the demand for the convenience of digital gaming has been present longer on PC too. And it started at an early enough point for players to not really consider the implications of the lack of ownership over the games they would buy. They were laser focused on the usefulness of downloading games from home. By the time Steam wrapped itself around the entire PC game distribution market like a python, physical copies were already out the door. And by the time the ownership conversation started to pick up, it was pretty much too late. PC gaming had already committed to an all-digital landscape. This lack of foresight is not uncommon. It has taken shape in different ways in the industry. For example, former CEO of Square Enix, Yosuke Matsuda, said that the source code for many of the company's older games are lost forever because developers simply deleted them to make room for the development of a new project. Now, some of you might be wondering, and the answer is yes. The primary reason why my main gaming platform of choice is consoles is because I prefer to own physical copies if the option is available to me. But I know that one actual practical issue with physical media ownership is space. Not everyone has enough physical space in their home to justify buying a bunch of shelves and dedicating themselves to physical from that point on. If you really don't have even an inch to spare, then of course you are completely entitled to stick with digital. Your money is yours to spend however you wish. You also might be currently living in a place you don't intend to stay for much longer in, so there's no point in diving into collecting now. That's fine too. But if you still want to start a physical collection in spite of a lack of that much room, I would recommend starting off by buying only your absolute favorite stuff. The movies, games, albums, or books that you just can't live without. The stuff that really defines you and your tastes. I think that's where every collection should start. And with that, I think this more or less concludes my thoughts on the current state and fate of physical media. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.